I learned that early on in my career at Princess Diana's funeral, where I was waiting for the hearse to go past. And then I got bored and I noticed the price sticker on the bottom of a woman's shoe who was kneeling in front of me. So I sort of bent down to pick up a picture of that. And then I just heard the whoosh of lots of flowers being thrown. And then I popped my head up and the hearse had gone.
If you lead an interesting life, good pictures will happen.
Oh, nice. You might well be my sexiest sounding guest.
Go somewhere you've never been before and take a camera.
We had this gorgeous Mediterranean light just flowing in.
Which Asda were you in?
Dartford.
Very nice.
Your first 10,000 pictures of your worst.
Let's sit down, let's have a cup of tea.
Welcome to the show. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to another episode of the Standout Photography Show with me, Matthew Walker, where as always it is my honour and privilege to sit down with some of the finest working photographers in the world to unpack their systems, workflows, and find out what enables them to perform consistently at the very top of their profession. Before I introduce our guest today, is there a photographer that you would like to hear in conversation? If so, let me know on Twitter or Instagram at Matthew D. A. Walker. That is at Matthew D. A. Walker. Many of you have done this already, and a huge thank you to each and every one of you. It is because of you that we have today's guest here on the show. So, on the show this week, episode 20, I welcome World Press Photo Award winner, Mr. Peter Dench. That is at Peter Dench on Twitter, at Dench Photo on Instagram, and www.peterdench.com on the World Wide Webs. Peter, in his own words, which I thoroughly enjoyed, was made in England in 1972. He is a UK-based photographer, writer, author, educator and curator with over 20 years experience behind the lens. Peter is a coveted World Press Photo Award winner in the People in the News Stories category and author of numerous books, including The Dench Dozen, Great Britons of Photography Volume 1, Dench Does Dallas, The British Abroad, A&E, Alcohol and England, and England Uncensored. His written contributions have been commissioned by The New Yorker, Telegraph magazine and a number of photo journals. He is also a visionary for Olympus cameras. Peter has been on my list since this podcast began, so I was thrilled when so many of you got in touch via Twitter to request I contact him to feature as a guest on the show. During our conversation, we discuss learning your trade on the job, getting access to the unaccessible, finding real stories, approaching real people to make photographs, using flash, expanding your skill set beyond photography, the importance of publishing books, knowing when to finish a project, which I'm sure many people will relate to, and of course, getting fired from Weymouth Joke Shop. So, without further ado, switch off from the world and enjoy my conversation with one of England's finest, Mr. Peter Dench. Peter Dench, it is an enormous pleasure to say welcome to the Standout Photography Show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Matthew.
No, honestly, the pleasure is all mine. You are one of those photographers that has been on my list for a long time to speak with. And then I asked listeners on Twitter recently if there is a photographer or photographers that they would like to hear in conversation on the show, and your name was one of the names that came up consistently, which I was absolutely thrilled about. So let's start with how you describe yourself and your work recently. You're in that wonderful position, like many of my guests, where other people describe you and your work for you. As an example, Wikipedia describe you as a photojournalist working primarily in advertising, editorial and portraiture photography. Olympus describe you in a very similar fashion, but how do you personally describe you and your work as a photographer?
You've done your research, haven't you?
I have.
That Wikipedia entry doesn't make much sense if it's a photojournalist focusing primarily in advertising.
Slightly contradictory. Yeah.
Slightly contradictory. But yeah, I describe myself as simply a jobbing photographer. I do all of those things. I would take any photo for money. My main focus is photojournalism, but I'm also hunting advertising work all the time, portrait work, whatever's out there. I kind of learnt my trade in the noughties, in the magazines, specifically GQ, Tatler, Marie Claire, the Sunday Times magazine, and there was a variety of work for everyone. There was so much work that at times they'd mix things up. So they'd sort of have me go and do a portrait shoot. They might have a portrait photographer do a more reportage piece, and not all of them got published. There was enough work for picture editors to make mistakes. So, there was a budget that you could have, so if it didn't work out, it wasn't a sackable offence. So I basically, to answer your question, describe myself as just a jobbing photographer. I still live hand to mouth, day to day, just hunting work from whatever area of photography I can find.
Why photography for you? I ask this in every interview, and I know how broad it sounds, but what is it about photography? Because I've heard you in interviews, and you can tell when you talk about it, your eyes light up. You can tell you love what you do. What is it about photography for you?
Yeah, I'll be a photographer till I die. The highs are high, the lows are low. There's no middle ground. That's what excites me. I guess why photography? As a teenager, I actually wanted to be a cricketer. That was my passion, but I could never quite get over the nerves of striding out to the middle of the pitch with the real possibility of immediate failure in front of a crowd. Debilitating. I used to feel nauseous weeks before a match. So when I was 14, I kind of traded in my grey Nichols bat and pads and cricket whites, and I thought, well, what shall I do instead? And I thought photography was quite an interesting way to explore the world. You could be at an event, but the eyes weren't on you. You could fail later, or now you can just sort it out in Photoshop. So photography has been with me since I was 14, and gradually through my teenage years, I was fired from every job of responsibility to everyone I was responsible to, apart from working in fashion retailer Topman. So if photography doesn't work out, when I left Topman aged 19, 20, I was told there would always be a job for me there. They couldn't understand why I was leaving. They said in 10 years' time, I could have made assistant manager in the Bournemouth store. So photography is always there. I'm not an obsessive photographer. I can go 2 weeks without taking a picture, and it doesn't bother me because I know the passion will return. You won't find me sort of twitching behind my lens while we're having this conversation, or if I'm having dinner, or I'm quite happy to keep the camera in my bag, pull it out when I'm on the clock and put it away when I know the commission or whatever I've set out to do is over. But going back, I think photography, I'm not from a wealthy family. I knew the only way that I would get on a plane and see the world would be at someone else's expense. And photography seemed, a good way to do that. And I think when I was 18, 19, looking at the books in the Bournemouth Art College I was studying at, and, I saw books by Paul Rees and Greg Leach and, Elliot Erwitz. I thought if you could travel the world, make people laugh, make people think, and have a few drinks along the way, then that wasn't a bad way to spend your time on this earth. Matthew.
Couldn't agree more.
But the world's shrinking, isn't it? Travel is my sort of drive. To be in motion, to explore somewhere new, and that's becoming increasingly tricky.
Yes, it is, but I completely agree with you. Travel is a huge driver for me as well, and I'm sure it will resonate with many photographers listening to this podcast. Out of interest, just to journey back on something you mentioned earlier, completely unrelated to photography, you said that you were fired from numerous jobs. Do you remember why you were fired?
Yeah, because it was something like I was a checkout operator at Asda, and they wouldn't let me go and watch my football team on a Saturday. So I think I just sort of got up and left. And also, if the product wouldn't scan, I'd let the customer have it anyway. Especially if it was like a pensioner who looked as though they were sort of a bit hard up, I might sort of slide a joint of meat sort of around the scanner for them. So I think people just picked up on the fact that I wasn't always adhering to the law of work, and so I was I guess I kind of just took the mickey a bit too much. If I knew I was going to leave at some point, then perhaps I didn't commit myself as much as I should have done. So I was fired from the Weymouth Joke Shop, the Weymouth Time Walk, the Weymouth Asda, Pontins, the Weymouth Pontins holiday camp where I was dishwasher. It's relentless, Matthew. So again, that kind of why photography is because I can't fire myself, or I suppose I could, but I'm only responsible to me. I guess I learned early on in my career that having a boss wasn't particularly advantageous for my profession.
Well, Weymouth Joke Shop's loss is photography's gain, because having been fired, you, if I've done my homework correctly, you graduated from the University of Derby with a degree in photographic studies in '95. What was your time like at Derby?
I graduated with a first class honours degree, Matthew.
Congratulations.
What was my time like there? It was more a time to mature, to figure out what I didn't want to do, I suppose. I was one of few photographers in my year that didn't photograph myself or my friends naked. It was one of those quite conceptual courses where documentary photography wasn't really encouraged. But I guess I still got a good grade out of it, so there must be some sort of value in what I did. But it was always quite look at me photography, and I knew that's what I didn't want to do, so that kind of propelled me away from that. And I didn't know public schools existed, posh schools, until I was about 18, and I knew it was something that I wanted to look at. So I spent quite a lot of my time at the University of Derby trying to access as many country homes and posh schools as I could. So I wrote to the Duke of Devonshire and I asked if I could be invited to his tercentenary celebrations, and he was kind enough to send me an invite, but not kind enough to make it a +1. So I kind of partied alone. But I found that kind of fascinating, these schools. I went to Malvern Girls' College to photograph, rugby school to photograph. These were worlds that I completely oblivious to growing up. So that again is kind of back to why photography, because it can unlock access like that and continues to do so. So that was part of my Derby days. I worked quite hard. I partied in Bournemouth, and then when I arrived in Derby, I knew it was time to sort of focus on what I wanted to do with my craft. So my dissertation on Dr. Diamond and his use of black and white photography in the treatment of 19th century female lunatics has not come in helpful for my career. I've rarely had to draw on that sort of dissertation to obtain jobs and commissions. And to be, I was completely underprepared when I left. Even though I kind of maximised my time. When I arrived in London, I moved to London the day after I graduated. And, I didn't really know what a picture editor was. I didn't know what an art director did. I didn't know how to approach publications. So it took a long time. I signed on the dole for 2 to 3 years and had to rebuild my portfolio from scratch because I knew it wasn't up to the grade. It wasn't where I needed to be. So, it was. So I've got mixed feelings about Derby. It helped me and it also hindered me.
There's a couple of things that I just wanted to journey back on there. One of them was that you said during your time at Derby, you realised that photography had the power to unlock access to areas that potentially you wouldn't normally have access to. I completely agree with you, it does, but only if you, as the photographer, put yourself out there to get into those areas. And you mentioned then you wrote to places. Is that something that you've constantly done throughout your career, is actively trying to get into places that you wouldn't ordinarily have access to?
Yeah, that's that is a big part of the job. That is a huge time commitment to try and sort of 80% access. Once you're in, that's the hard part done, I think, and then you can just focus on trying to make good pictures. So I'm always proactive and pitching and trying to get into clubs, countries, embassies, on buses, trains, where resorts, wherever, whatever piques my interest. I'll sort of try and find a way in, and I've had some success with that.
And is that something that was taught to you, or was it something that potentially you'd seen others do, or was it just a genuine curiosity for finding those stories?
Yeah, it wasn't taught, in an education way. Again, that wasn't what Derby did. Yeah, so it's just instinct. You see something that you want to witness firsthand, and I'll do whatever it takes to. It just makes it so much easier as a photographer. Once you've got access, permission, you can go about your business making pictures. So I know I'm jumping ahead here, but when I shot The British Abroad, which was a sort of a reportage on how the young British behave, in party resorts across Europe. Looking at the pictures, you could think that I just turned up there and grabbed images, wherever I went. But it was carefully planned. Access had to be achieved. You can't just turn up in these resorts where there's a lot of crime, I guess. There's a lot of shady characters, and you can't just walk into a club and start making pictures. So I made sure on that particular reportage that access was secured wherever I went. And then, that's a huge weight off. Once you can walk into a pool party or a club, or a phone party or whatever, knowing that, everyone who matters has been informed what you're there to do, then you can really kind of hone down your focus and start to gather the pictures that you're there for.
What are some of the most creative ways that you've found to approach places and get in places?
None. You just have to be truthful. There's no sort of wool pulling, whatever. I just, as a photojournalist, I have to be as open and honest as possible. So that's the way I go in. I say, this is what I want to achieve. This is what I think you'll benefit from. This is what you'll get out of it. This is what I'll get out of it. Can we collaborate? And if they say no, or can we work this way, then I have to sort of take that on board and decide whether that's a compromise or something that I want to move forward with.
The other thing that you mentioned, which I wanted to journey back on slightly, was that you said, having graduated from Derby, you felt underprepared for what the real world had in store. And I didn't train as a photographer, I trained as an actor, and I felt the same, actually. We learnt our craft, or parts of our craft, at drama school, but the actual realities of the real world, in terms of finding agents, meeting casting directors, and generally putting yourself out there, I didn't feel that was taught, so I felt quite underprepared entering that world, and had to work very hard to learn how to understand the business side of what it takes to be an actor. And, you know, I'm still learning now. Every job I walk on, whenever I walk on set or into a theatre, I'm constantly learning and being inquisitive and wanting to improve. And, you know, it's the same with photography. I constantly want to learn and improve. It's one of the main driving forces for starting this podcast. How did you go about learning those steps for yourself?
Well, I kind of had a couple of friends who I moved to London with, and I said, so I had to start rebuilding my portfolio from scratch. So I'd apply for press passes to various events like Royal Ascot, the Epsom Derby, go along like that. Yeah, it was very just instinctive, really. I didn't have an agency for 5 years after graduation. I didn't have a group of professional, I wasn't in a press room or it was very isolating. It was just, you kind of woke up, tried to sort of think about opportunities. I was in central London, so there was plenty of things going on. There was Euro 96. Blair was in 97. So it was an optimistic time. And there were plenty of things to photograph. And if you couldn't get press passes, you can always hang around the outside of events, jollies, jamborees, fairs. So over time, the only way to see a picture editor in the mid-90s, there was no PDFs, no emails. So you had to be in London if you wanted to work for magazines, and you had to literally walk the pavement and knock on doors. So I did that consistently for years. And one particular person, Aidan Sullivan, who was the picture editor at the Sunday Times magazine, I'd go and see him, and after 6 months, and he'd say, "Okay, your work's progressing. Come and see me in another 6 months." So I'd do that. And then it was another 6 months. And then finally, after 2 years, I went to see him, and he looked at my work, and he felt that it progressed to a point where I was ready for a commission. So I did that with a lot of magazines. And once someone has an invested interest in your development, they've seen that you've listened, taken on board their advice, they've nurtured you to an extent. There's that sort of collaboration and that bond that exists to today. So once the Sunday Times, once Aidan gave me a brilliant commission, which was spending a weekend in Britain's most popular lay-by, the old Willoughby Hedge lay-by on the A303, somewhere down near Stonehenge. It was perfect for me. So I just, I documented who came and went, missionaries on the way to Exeter to spread the joy of Jesus, the military heading in the opposite direction, families stopping off, men cruising the toilets looking for action. Once that article had published, then that gives other picture editors the confidence to commission you. So as soon as the Sunday Times ran that in 1999, I think it was, so 4 years after I graduated, then I'd get calls from Marie Claire, GQ, Tatler, Arena, The Face. So it kind of escalated quite quickly, but it took 4 years to get to that point. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily advise people need to be in London now. In a way, it's better to be a more local photographer. Secure your area, photograph Bradford, Norwich, Cornwall. There's no reason to be in London. For me, there's still enough reasons to stay here. But back then, if you weren't here, knocking on doors, showing up at parties, openings. Oh God, so I'm going off on one here, but I remember going to the World Press Photo Awards at, the South Bank, where they've consistently been hosted, and there's a balcony that overlooks the floor where everyone was congregating, and it was packed. And I remember, in the mid-90s, just breathing in, looking down, and going, "Oh my God, every single person that matters is here." And I could pinpoint, the art director at GQ, the picture editor, wherever I wanted to work, whoever I wanted to work for was there. So it was networking was crucial. And the last time I went to the World Press Photo Awards at the same venue, there was about 8 of us, sort of talking about the state of the industry. But, let's not have that conversation. So yeah, I wasn't taught what to do, and I'm still trying to figure it out because the industry's changed. So back then, I'd do the pictures, the writer would do the words. You'd get on a plane, you'd come back, chuck a bag of film over at Metro, go and have a bottle of wine, the phone would ring again, and off you'd go again. And that all kind of disappeared around 2008, 2009. So you kind of had to relearn what it was to be a photographer.
Do you think you learnt more in those 4 years from graduating to getting that commission about the industry itself and about you and your work than you did during your time at Derby?
Yeah, I had to undo. Derby, the course was photographic studies, so it was quite academic, and for several years after graduating, just by taking the lens cap off my camera, I felt a misogynist. I had to undo a lot of rhetoric.
Right.
Why am I taking a photo? What's it for? What does it mean? Is it a window on the world or a mirror of its maker? And in the end, I decided that wasn't helpful. So I had to kind of strip back all that sort of academic learning and just understand that it's okay to take pictures to fulfill a double-page spread, a brief, a cover, keep it simple. So yes, I think I did learn, more in that 4 years since graduating. I wouldn't necessarily sort of upset a lot of my colleagues, but I wouldn't necessarily advise on an education or a degree. But that's for everyone to make their own choice.
It is, and I think it depends on you as an individual, because I speak from personal experience. I learn and I work a lot better learning on the job and watching other people and being just generally inquisitive than being taught what to do. Is that something that you can relate to?
Yeah, to be fair, there seem to be 2 routes of. This is what I like about photography. There's no, if you're an accountant and you pass this exam, you earn this much, and you're that good. Photography, our route into it. Each photographer's route into photography and journey through it is unique. So I've lost it again.
No, it's all right. It's all right. No, I was saying, in a nutshell, basically, I prefer learning on the job than being taught.
Yeah. So some of my when I graduated, there were kind of two routes. Some of my friends went straight into assisting, and others we just tried to learn on our own. And we both, people who went the assisting route and my route, we kind of emerged at the same time. So there never seemed to be any sort of right way of doing it. So, and a lot of the people who got into assisting, because they had that regular wage and that security of work, sometimes it may have taken them longer to break away from that and go, fully freelance again, which is understandable. And because I was I was on the dole, the only way, was up really. It couldn't get any lower. So, eventually, I managed to sign off. And, I was, according to the taxman, I was freelance in 1998. So 22 years later, I'm still here.
Well, I tell you what, let's start by covering some of those 22 years. When I was doing my homework for our conversation, which I might add I thoroughly enjoyed, one of the things I noticed, you have a very unique way of taking a very broad subject matter and narrowing it down to focus on a very unique aspect of that subject that tells the stories of real people. And if we take your project and your book A1, Britain on the Verge, as an example, the wider subject matter was Brexit, and you managed to narrow it down to the lives of real people who live in and around the A1. And I guess more recently with your lockdown projects, Lockdown Fanatical Football Fan, Sunseen, COVID-19, Quarantine Tale of the Tape, again, the wider subject matter is COVID-19, and you have found something very specific within that. How do you begin taking such a large subject matter and narrowing it down to find the stories that you want to tell?
Yeah, I trust my instinct. I'm not a spot news photographer. I learned that early on in my career at Princess Diana's funeral, where I was waiting for the hearse to go past, and then I got bored and I noticed the price sticker on the bottom of a woman's shoe who was kneeling in front of me. So I sort of bent down to pick up a picture of that, and then I just heard the whoosh of lots of flowers being thrown, and then I popped my head up and the hearse had gone. So I realised that happened quite often. So I work on longer stories. So I guess the pictures in between. So as soon as, let's say, we take Brexit, as soon as Brexit happened, I knew I had to contribute, make a visual contribution to the history of Brexit. But what do you do, and how do you do it differently? So I knew, like a lot of colleagues would be out shooting the protests, Whitehall, what's happening in central London. I knew I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to compete with that. So, the A1 just seems, it's only a mile from where I live. The Paul Graham book is always resonating. And, I thought 30 plus years after he did the journey, Brexit was a reason enough for me to do it. And, sometimes I work better if there's physical boundaries, whether it's a street, a community centre, a town, or on this instance, a road. I'm not very good at chasing a story over, a geographical expanse. I want to know that I can't go further left or further right. The story is contained within this space. It just makes things simpler for me. So, the A1, it seemed it's a road that connects as much as it divides. It's the spine of the nation. The history of England is written in that road. From the Romans, through to Thatcher's Britain. So it was just it just kind of made sense. So that was that one. Something else. With the lockdown stories. My job is to photograph change, and change was happening on a daily basis. The visual shifts were slight, but they were there. So again, I was actually never fitter and more tanned than I was during lockdown. I was walking probably 40 kilometres a week, from my home in central London. I can walk down to the South Bank to Trafalgar Square, and it's just, it's just constantly hunting stories. What's going to, what's going to be significant in 5-10 years time. You don't know. So a lot of it is just instinct. If I have an idea that won't go away, the only way for it to go away is to do it. And if you have an idea like that, then I'd hope there'd be an audience for it. So I guess to what you're trying to get at, I'll go out. I mean, a lot of photojournalists say that you have to know what you want to say, and then go and take those pictures that say it. I don't work that way. I have an idea of what I might want to say, then go and gather those pictures and then decide what I want to say from the edit. Because how do I know what I want to say until I've photographed through the situation? I don't want to impose my beliefs on something, before I've actually witnessed it or sort of experienced it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It makes complete sense. And actually, you mentioned something really interesting then about when you said you work better within parameters. So, for example, the A1 was your parameter for that story. Do you find by giving yourself less options in that respect, sticking to a one road, for example, do you find by giving yourself less options, it enhances your creativity because you are finding things within those?
Yeah, it just makes it simpler. And then you're not sort of meandering, sort of all over the place, sort of running around trying to think that something better's happening. This weekend it was the Notting Hill Carnival.
Yes, I saw.
Supposed to be so.
I saw some of your tweets about it because you'd covered it last year, if I'm not mistaken.
But it didn't work this year. Like the fanatical football fans who went to stadiums during lockdown, even though they couldn't, get in the grounds. I thought there'd be die-hard carnivalers, which is a made-up word, who would be tempted to reach for the body paint, put on a costume and dance in their garden. So I walked the entire carnival route, and there wasn't anything interesting to photograph. As police were everywhere, patrolling, and so that idea didn't work. But again, but I knew that once I'd walked the route, that was the end of it. So it kind of it just helps to have an idea that is contained within a place. I think it's not always, I may be plagiarising Tom Stoddard here. The best way to prepare for this chat, Matthew, wasn't to binge listen to the previous 15 or 16 podcasts of yours. I felt ineffective. But Stoddard was a mentor of mine anyway during the early noughties, and so. But something he said has always stuck with me. The hardest thing as a photographer is to keep swinging your legs out of bed, to leave loved ones behind, to spend money you might not have for no tangible reward. So if I haven't got a specific place to go to, I just try and have a specific word to keep in my head. So if I go to a town I've never been to before, what am I looking for today? Is it alcohol? Is it weather? Is it love? Is it food? And then so I kind of create a physical place, mentally, that this is what I'm looking for. So it discards all the other sort of visual noise, so I'm honing in on, drinking habits, for example.
What is it about the UK which fascinates you? Because again, when I was looking at your work, you're clearly, or I'm guessing anyway, a football fan. And a lot of your work is centred around real people in the UK. What is it you find fascinating about football and actually the British relationship with alcohol?
Oh, that's a can to open, isn't it? I mean, I have worked on assignment in over 65 different countries, so, but it is towards England that I consistently point my lens. It's my home, it's my passion, and its people are the ones that I want to understand the most. And it's accessible. I usually try to have 3 or 4 projects on the go at any one time of varying affordability. So if the coffers, are high, then I can get on a plane. If they're low, which is more often the case, then I can sort of use my travel card. So England is accessible, I guess. That's the first thing. But it is a unique. I think it's my duty, Matthew, to contribute my visual sort of archive well, it's not the truth, it's my truth. Simon Roberts will have another sort of archive to contribute. Homer Sykes has got his, so this is my England. So I'm constantly sort of trying to update, how I see it. So my relationship with alcohol goes, so I grew up in Weymouth. If I opened my front door, there was a brewery directly opposite. So I could smell the hops, from an early age. And both my parents worked for Devonish Brewery. My dad would get an allowance of a crate of beer every fortnight, and if I did my chores, he might let me have one. So that was my introduction to England. It was quite a boozy town. It was a holiday town, a working class holiday resort. Bristolians and Brummies would come down during factory shutdown. There was a Navy base, so you'd have the Navy boys coming in every other weekend. There was a lot of violence, and I was confused. It wasn't the National Trust image of England. So I understood from quite an early age, and especially from, when I started getting into photography, that one day I would want to document this part of Britain in depth. So it's a reportage. The Alcohol in England, is a reportage I'm proud of. It's the one that I wanted to do, and luckily in 2000 I just joined an agency called IPG, and Stoddard was there, and other photographers I'd studied. Zed Nelson was shooting, gun culture in America. Harry Boredom was there. David Medell was shooting sort of Tory story, his reportage on the Tory party. Stoddard was shooting AIDS in Africa and doing all the brilliant things he does. And, I was asked what I wanted to spend the next few years documenting. And IPG funded projects 50-50. And I just said, I want to look at the alcohol drinking habits of the English. So that was my kind of first major look at how we behave. And it sort of goes back to the upbringing that I had. And I just wanted to challenge an idea of England with what I thought England was.
You also have a wonderful way, when I was looking at your images, and I was trying to find the best way to articulate it. When you look at your images, I feel like you tell a story rather than reporting a story. And what I mean by that is you can report a story from a distance with a 200-300mm lens, whereas your images, you are in the story almost. You are right up close. Has that always been your style of photography, or has your voice and your style developed throughout your career? I always called the zoom lens the aging photographer's walking stick. But I do have one now. I like that. I'm 48. So, but as a young photographer, I felt a zoom lens was cheating. So for certainly the first 10 years of my career, I only ever shot on 35mm or 50mm or the equivalent of, because I thought it was purer. I thought it was more honest. And I shoot wide and I shoot close. I think it's more respectful. I want to be able to smell my subjects, respond to them if they want to talk to me, see what they've spilt down their jumper. And I think you can be more discreet the closer you are. So if I'm stood like on the other side of a room wielding a zoom lens at you, and you're kind of going, is that guy photographing me? And I'm looking at you going, is he trying to talk to me? And so I just felt that it just felt right that the best way for me to photograph was close. I mean, I am part of the story. I am in the story, I guess, but I don't think I affect what's happening. There's a lot of. I work hard, Matthew. If I'm shooting,
sometimes I'll walk 25 kilometers a day. I'll make sure if it's an event, I'll be there at the beginning and I'll be there at the very end. I want people to see my face from the very start. And so 2 hours into an event, they'll get used to me being around, and most people don't care about the photographer. I think I often say this: fear is in the head of the photographer. Most people want to enjoy their day, get on with their agenda, and to have a photographer sort of buzzing around, isn't too much of a problem. I don't wear. I haven't got any tattoos. I don't wear any religious insignia. I don't think I'm threatening to look at or to be around, so people can project onto me whatever they want. I don't want to make a statement about who I am, why I'm there, unless they ask, and then I'll explain explain succinctly what I'm trying to achieve. So, I think you've got to get in the mix, haven't you? So, yeah, it's an interesting point, the difference between reporting a story and actually getting stuck in. That's my way. And has it changed? Not really. That's still my approach, is to sort of embed myself in what I'm photographing as much as possible.
You mentioned, well, actually, many wonderful things there, but one of them, when you said you don't, whilst you're part of the story, you don't affect the story, and I completely agree with you when I said that you are part of the story. The thing that I guess I found fascinating was exactly that you weren't affecting the story. The images you take are real, they're not posed, they're not staged, and to be that up close and capture that reality and that realness and that raw emotion is a real skill. And I guess you've answered part of the question, which I was going to say to you, what techniques or how do you approach people that you are photographing when you are that close and still get a truthful image for your story?
Yeah, well, I'm not ashamed to be a photographer. I don't shoot from the hip. I'm quite deliberate. And so I always have the camera on display. And for the first 10 years of my career, I shot on medium format film with a Metz flash bolted to the side. So I couldn't hide it. Again, some photojournalists, they say, you've got to be quiet, be with your Leica, be in the background, shoot and move, and I understand that. So for me, I'd get to that place, but it might take 2 or 3 hours. So I'd walk into a pub or a club and the camera would be on display, and generally people would go, don't point that thing at me, or come and take our picture. So you almost had to waste some frames just to get to know the people and the situation. And then after a time, they would go back to doing what, I found interesting in the first place. And then I think after a conversation or an exchange, then you kind of almost feel as though you've been given, permission to be there and to go about your business. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of like tips and techniques, I've highlighted a few. I try not to. It's not about me. It's about recording what I'm finding interesting that's happening. And just try. I do try and be discreet. And if someone, I don't generally talk to people if I don't have to, but of course I will. And I'll always be truthful and have a short, clear answer. So if someone says, "Are you taking a picture of me?" I'll say yes. And they'll say, "Why?" And I'll say, "Well, I'm shooting a reportage on England's relationship with alcohol." And then either say, "That's fine," or, very few people will say, "Don't take a picture of me." Or they might even suggest where else I can go, So I think, it's back to that fear, isn't it? That I'm often asked, do I get into trouble or taking pictures? And, 95% of people in England, in my experience, don't mind being photographed. Increasingly, they want to know where the photograph is going to go. There's a bit more caution as to, why you are photographing them. That's changed in the last sort of 5 years, but the method still applies. You know, I'll tell them what the truth is of what I'm doing and what I want the picture to achieve. And generally, people want to collaborate on that. I've only ever been punched in the face once, Matthew, and then that was in Leeds. And you know, if you've been to Leeds, you'll understand. You know, that's not uncommon. And it wasn't because I was photographing. I was kind of intervening in a sort of domestic incident, really.
It's interesting that when you just said then about most people are willing to collaborate, do you think that's because of the way you approach them, though, and the way you conduct yourself and your work? And I mean that by, I was watching some of your interviews, and you have an interview style that reminded me of Louis Theroux. He's very disarming, and it's because of that people open up to him. And I watched an interview with Piers Morgan not long after I'd seen something of Louis Theroux's, and they're completely different. And the interviewee walked out of Piers Morgan's interview because of his technique, and Piers Morgan's own ego was getting in the way of the interview, whereas Louis Theroux doesn't do that. Do you think people are more open because of the way you are and you approach them?
Well, first of all, I'm very grateful that you've put me in the same conversation as Louis Theroux, rather than Piers Morgan.
But it's true. You know, I watched your film. Was it set in Bradford? The one you did for Channel Burnley. I beg your pardon. And you do. People open up to you, and it's the way you approach them. And Louis Theroux does exactly the same thing. He's very disarming.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't always work though. It's getting increasingly difficult. So that for the Sun, Sea and COVID-19 reportage that I did as lockdown eased, it was a commission. I was commissioned by the Sunday Times magazine to sort of try and gather an idea of what a staycation might look like, what a beach holiday in Britain will look like in the future. And I still find it difficult after 22 years just approaching strangers, trying to sort of establish a rapport and get some pictures quite quickly, because you don't have the time anymore, where in the sort of 10 years ago I might have had a 10, 12, sometimes even a 16-day commission. Now it's 2-3 days, 4, maybe 5 at most. So, I have to sort of refine what I've learned and package it a lot quicker. So with that, I'd turn up at a beach. I'd immediately put on my press pass, which I didn't do for 15 years. But now it seems more sensible that people get quick. I can't hide. There I am. In my shorts on a beach with a camera and a press pass. I'm there to photograph. I am press. So you can't hide from that. And on that occasion, doing that job, I think I had about a 40% refusal from people being photographed. So it's not all. I don't just turn up and people open up to me. You have to graft at it. Sometimes I'd talk to a group on the beach for 10 minutes and they'd still say, no, we're not comfortable with being photographed, which is understandable if they were doing laughing gas or, they were supposed to be at work. This is why I shoot close. I want to get an understanding of, who the people are I'm photographing. I see a lot of the press images from that time captioned wrong. Someone might say that police were sort of telling people to move on, and that was shot on a long lens, but I was with those police and they were saying something completely different. Anyway, so again, I'm kind of, I think people do open up to me, but it's not always straightforward. And particularly now, there is more of a suspicion as to how the picture's going to be used, where it's going to go. And this time, there was a lot of toxicity towards the press, and they thought I was trying to catch them out by flouting social distancing rules and regulations. So that particular story, there was a lot more trying to sort of a lot more conversations about what I wanted to photograph and the reasons behind it. So, but yeah, it still applies. A lot of people accuse my work of being sneering. I've been accused of betraying my class, and that's all fine. But as long as I feel as though the way I'm working is respectful and the pictures I'm getting are relevant and they're telling, a truth of what's happening, then, that's what kind of allows me to deflect some of the criticisms that come my way.
Well, I'd just like to say that I think any criticism of your work is not warranted because, like I say, I thoroughly enjoyed doing my research for this. I was just fascinated looking at your work. And one of the things I noticed, actually, is that you use Flash quite often. And I wondered what the choice was for that. What does that offer you?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to an insecurity of when I was starting out as a photographer. I mean, I never trusted pushing film, so I always thought, I didn't want to develop a roll of film at 1600, 3200. I just didn't trust the technology or whatever, the process. So I always thought if I blasted a flash, something would burn itself onto the film. So that was part of it. Another part of it is, I am from the seaside. I can't see in black and white. I've shot less than 10 rolls of film in black and white. The first colours I saw were saturated. The red arrows, deck chairs, majorettes. The sea. I was never more than a few minutes walk from the sea, and flash helps. It helps sharpen things. It helps saturate things. It gets rid of the shadows, and it's just, we haven't said the P word yet, have we? The Martin Parr word, and you can't photograph in England and in colour without these comparisons being made. But I like to think I would have arrived at that style of photography, regardless of Martin and his existence. Sometimes it's helped my progress, sometimes it's hindered, but whatever, we're all out there sort of trying to do what we do. So, and I could discard flash because digital photography has progressed in such a way that, low light photography is much easier to do. But I still want that kind of that sharpness and that clarity that flash gives. And again, some people, I've heard flash is rape. I've had that sort of some people so vehemently opposed to flash because again, it's kind of affecting a situation. It's not recording accurately what you see. But I think there's enough positives in using it for me. To keep with it.
Yeah, and I think it gives you in your images a style as well, which is why I was intrigued when I noticed that you used it a lot.
Yeah, no, that's deliberate. I mean, because you can shoot in low light with digital. There is a huge shift towards that kind of aesthetic. Where a lot of photographers are using it well. But again, it's for me, it just doesn't, I don't see that way. I still want that sort of, that brightness and that saturation to come through. Are we talking kit, Matthew?
I mean, it wasn't where I intended to go, but I guess we kind of are.
Oh, good.
But then I suppose it's like what we were talking about earlier when all other news photographers are looking one way at the big picture, you are honing in on something specific. And I guess flash, when I noticed that, and you just said then a lot of people are using digital, so they're not using flash, and you are doing something different, which gives you a very unique style.
Well, yeah, it's not that different though, is it? But yeah, I mean, if there's other photographers where I feel uncomfortable and question whether I should be there. What am I contributing that these guys and girls aren't going to get anyway? So generally I'll let the news photographers do their job, and then when the situation dismantles, then maybe I'll pick up some pictures myself. So the pictures in between, I thought that could be the name of my biography, or it's what I do dodo, I don't know, but a sideways glance, that's kind of where I operate. So while people are getting the money shot, I'm getting the price sticker on the bottom of someone's shoe. But that's the way I like it.
One of the other things that I noticed when I was doing my research, I heard someone describe it as a generalised specialist, and I mean this as a compliment. So you're not just a photographer, you are also a very good presenter, writer and curator. Has combining multiple skills enhanced your career for you?
Well, it's allowed me to survive. I mean, I don't necessarily want to do all those other things, but when photography, 2008, 2009 was quite a defining time. So I'd had, say, 10 years as a photographer where I would just do the pictures, and then I noticed that the writer was being asked to take some photos, because of the explosion of digital budgets editorial budgets were collapsing. So I was noticing that, the writers were being asked to, be photographers, because it makes sense if you can just send one person than two. So I thought, hold on, this isn't helpful. So I thought, well, if a photographer can write, that's got to be an advantage. So the more you can offer, the more chance you've got of surviving, in the industries. So, for 10 years I just did the pictures, and now a client can come to me and, I'll do the pictures, I can write a piece, I'll record some sound, I'll do a GIF if you want to. It's just another, you've got to be more of a one-man band now, like, be able to sort of offer everything. So, the writing's always been there, and it's something, I enjoy. Because as I said early on in the podcast, sometimes I don't photograph for 2 weeks. There just isn't that drive. The magic has momentarily disappeared. So then I can go, well, I'll do some articles, do some interviews, do some writing, and so you keep that creativity. Photography is quite a selfish pursuit, and necessarily so. And for 10 years, I kind of competed. And when I saw other photographers doing well, it was irksome. And then when I entered my 40s, I realised that they weren't going away, and they were actually doing good work, and continuing to. So I kind of took more of an interest in what the wider industry were doing, and writing and curating shows for other photographers. Sometimes sounds suicidal, doesn't it? Why should I shine a light on a competitor? But I'm comfortable with my own craft, my place in the industry, and these are collaborative times. So what have you got that I need? What have I got that I can help you with? That's the way I try to work now, and have done. If I've got a gallery space and you've got an exhibition, it makes sense to combine the two. Or if I can write about your new project or give you a book review, that's going to be helpful, and you might be able to return the favour one day. So it's a bartering system now. It's back to that, and I quite like that.
Yeah, and it's a very lovely way it's a very lovely outlook to have as well. And I like to think that I work in a very similar way.
Yeah, I mean, I'd still rather be a photographer and shed the rest, but that's not practical. at the moment. So I remember once, my business card for 10 years said photographer, and then I remember one year going, oh no, and then the next one it said image maker, and I thought, oh, that's a bit pretentious. But I do remember that point in 2008, 2009. Photographers, we all kind of were scrabbling around thinking, oh my God, what are we going to do? Maybe I should shoot video, maybe I should do this. And we've all calmed down a bit now from then. But most of us have kind of added to our skill set in various ways, which I think is a smart thing to do. So when I left university, if you didn't become a photographer, you had failed. If you worked in a gallery, you'd failed. If you were still an assistant, you'd failed. You had to be a photographer. And now, if you can hang on in the industry in any way possible, whether that's curating, writing, exhibiting, whatever, that is to be applauded and encouraged.
I completely agree. I wanted to touch on some of your books as well, because you're one of the many photographers I've spoken to that have got their own books, and I'm just fascinated by how you, when you work on a project, how you touched on it earlier about telling your story afterwards. How do you decide what work to display in a book? How do you whittle down the number of images you have to tell the story that you want to tell? Because and I guess the book thing for me is fascinating, because with a website you can change, you can add an image, take an image away months, years down the line, whereas with a book you can't do that. How do you whittle down the images that you want to display to tell the story you want to in a book?
First of all, books matter. They're our children. They're our legacy. I don't want people to remember the house I lived in. I'd rather they remember the books I produced. And books are they're closure. So take the Alcohol in England book. So the first thing is, when do you know it's finished? That's a big question. It could be.
It was going to be one of my questions. Completely agree.
And that particular one, it was 10 years. I thought It would be 3 years, but then you felt as though it wasn't done. And then after 10 years, I started repeating the pictures, and I felt the situation I was documenting had passed. I felt between 1998 and 2008 that I was documenting a unique piece of English history where we were drinking longer, cheaper, and more affordable than ever before. And in 2008, I did see a shift away from that, away from the pub to people drinking at home, away from alcopops. This can be disputed in the medical facts, whichever way you want to spin it. But the way I saw it, for me, in 2008, that particular body of work was over. I didn't know it was going to end then, but it just, I kept seeing things I'd seen before, or seeing things that weren't as interesting. So you're right. Then you have this pool of pictures, and a book seems like closure. And then I'll show the pictures to as many people as I can in the industry, in my family, outside of the industry, because you can become too affectionate for your own pictures. So if I spent like £200 hunting some pictures, I try and include one of them, but they might not be any good. But because I spent time and money getting them, I've put more value on them, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
So you live with them for a while, you show them to as many people as you can, and slowly your pool of pictures starts to come to the surface. Sometimes some of them you have to let go. Some that may not be as strong but are relevant in telling the story get put in, and it's and then one day you just have to let it go, And so for me, kind of that particular reportage, I don't know how many pictures are in the book, but maybe around 90 to 100. And I think each one matters. It tells a story. It progresses the reportage. It adds something. So, and once the book's published, you can pop it on the shelf and what's next. So that was kind of the first one, and then but if you take 10 years to complete a body of work, I've probably only got 2 left. so my focus now is kind of shooting something and getting it out there as quickly as possible, whether that's a zine or a book or an exhibition. There's more ways to have your work seen, outside of the traditional magazine spread and books. But anyway, I'm waffling a bit, but books matter, and I think it's in terms of deciding what goes in them, it's okay. Here's why books are important to me as well, because once my images are with an agency like with Getty Images, or anyone can use them. They can be pulled out of context. They can run in a publication with a different title over them, and a lot of people do get in touch and say, "Why did you release that picture into the world? Why did you think that picture deserved to be seen?" And I can say, well, at least with the book, this is the context where it lives, permanently, physically. This is how I want it to be seen. That's kind of the blueprint for the whole reportage. So, hopefully there's an answer in there somewhere.
There is. Will you ever, in the same way that we spoke about with the A1 earlier, where you gave yourself parameters, will you ever give yourself a deadline to finish something like a book or a project? Even if there isn't a deadline to hit, will you give yourself one to give you something to aim for?
Well, yeah, I only say about mortality now is it's but with the Tom Stoddard podcast, if something does need 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, 20 years to finish, I will see that through. So I wouldn't necessarily give myself a deadline if it wasn't justifiable and if it wasn't a commission. But you've got to shoot through the story. You've got to just sort of move through it, and you will understand when it's over. And that's the hard bit, is knowing it's finished and letting go. Because I think a lot of photographers, and I'm guilty of this, is hanging on to something, and just because you've been shooting something for 10 years doesn't make it any more valid as if you could have shot it in 2 years. And it kind of gives a lot of photographers a reason, doesn't it? I've been shooting this for however long, and to give that up and to sort of close it off and then sort of leave yourself naked and vulnerable without that kind of protective cloak of a long-term project or reportage. It's quite a hard thing to do, but it's necessary.
Were books always part of the plan when you started out? And I asked that because I spoke with Chris Weston, who was a wildlife photographer, and he said he knew as soon as he started out in photography he wanted a book. He said for him that was the holy grail almost.
Well, that's a good phrase, and I don't know how old he is or for what generation he's from, but certainly for me, the Holy Grail was a book and hopefully a corner house publication, and then an accompanying exhibition, because that was the only way I got to see great photography. Was in when I was studying in Derby, if you wanted to see an exhibition, you had to get on a National Express coach, sit next to someone inevitably eating egg sandwiches, and get yourself down to London and hunt down Mark Power's shipping forecast exhibition, or whatever was happening here. And so books were always the plan. I still think they're important. They're still important to me, but not as much as, when you have to go through the process, which I've been fortunate enough to go through, where, your first book, my first book was England Uncensored, which was 10 years looking at the behaviour of the English. I was lucky enough to go to Verona, to the prestigious printers there. I smelt the paper, felt the weight, signed off the sheets, and it was a beautiful experience. And okay, that's done. And then I was thinking, well, what else? And I want my books to be cheap, affordable. I want people to use them, not find them precious. I want them to stuff them in their rucksack, take them down the pub, share them, show them, get them dog-eared. So, the books, subsequent books, I went to Blue Coat Press because, they do that. They do big, affordable books. And now, I've tried that. And now, the next ones, I might try something else. So it's a whole different sort of area to try and, you have to understand what's the best way to present the work. It might not be a book. How is it best to reach an audience? It is a tool. Sometimes, it's not the right one. I'm up for zines at the moment because they're quite a quick hit. But there's various. So I'm just looking at my books now, but they are, sometimes I can't look at them for years, and then other times, I'll need to sort of go back to them and relearn from them.
It may sound really obvious for you now, looking back, having produced numerous books, but what practical steps did you take to get your first book off the ground?
The first one was crowdfunded. So back in 2012, so it might have been quite an early. I know crowdfunding is kind of the model now for publishing books. So the first one was crowdfunded. I had to raise, I think it was $12,000, and managed to do that in a couple of weeks. Alcohol in England was funded by the publisher. I was very grateful to Blue Coat Press for that. The British Abroad, I had to part crowdfund. So there's always ways, build an audience, see what interest there is out there for a book. Does the visual community need this book? I mean, it can be quite a self-satisfying pursuit, but still, I wouldn't ever dissuade anyone from going through that process, but you just got to find a way of making it happen.
If you could, having produced the books that you have and the wonderful vast body of work that you have, if you could frame only one image of yours, which would it be? No idea. I've no idea. I mean, or perhaps let me rephrase. If you could display only one image on a billboard in Times Square or Leicester Square, which would it be?
The next one. Again, this is totally unfair, Matthew. I mean, I generally don't approve of displaying my own work in my home, but sometimes it's necessary just to keep somewhere to store work. So I'm looking around my room at the moment, and I've got 3 pictures from the Trans-Siberian World Cup reportage, 2 of Lenin, statues of Lenin, and 1 of the view from the back of the Trans-Siberian. So these are quite personal for me. But if I was going to show something on a billboard in Times Square, I guess it would just be one to try and promote me as a photographer. And I'm sure I'd make the wrong choice and just show something that I had a personal affection for that wouldn't sort of arouse the interest of the people that I was trying to target. But no, I think I'm going to have to swerve that question.
That's all right. You swerve away. That's fine.
Because some of my work, I dislike, but then the affection for it comes back. Some pictures I find irritable. So something I like today, in a few years' time, I might sort of not look at it ever again. So I don't think there's one picture that would kind of define me. And then, if I show one picture, who knows, in 5 years it might be an inappropriate picture. So how do I go about that? So the too many choices involved. So
it's interesting that you just said then that you dislike some of your images, even though they've been well received. Why is that?
Well, they just become irritable. If that is the one, there's a few pictures that people tag me to and recognise me for. Sometimes I don't like the way the picture's been used. Sometimes I don't like what it's come to represent. There is a life. Like a music. If there's some songs I can't listen to, even though because they were so emotional. So I did this job I did this reportage called Football's Hidden Story. It's 26 stories in 22 different countries, looking at the positive impact grassroots football has had, in communities across the globe. And I kind of listened to a soundtrack, on my iPod while I was shooting that. And most of the songs now I can't listen to because it evokes too much. It's too much of that time. Sometimes it's upsetting to remember some of the things I saw. So, and sometimes pictures are like that. You move on from them, or like a breakup. You don't want to go back and associate what you were like or what you did at that time. That's quite deep, isn't it?
It's quite deep. It is.
So I could never listen to Cast's "Walk Away" again because it was always the tune that I played after a particularly harrowing encounter. And then it kind of throws me straight back there. So you have to be careful about these triggers. And pictures for me are sometimes like that. So it will take me to a situation that I regretted, or where I didn't perform well, or I didn't photograph well, or it's just antsy, gives me angst. Some of my pictures.
Do you remember where you were when you look at a photograph? I've asked this to a few photographers, and I ask because I don't know why. There is a strange clarity that I have, and a few other photographers I've spoken with say the same thing, that you can look at an image, and it's one of the things I love about photography, and you can remember exactly where you were, who you were with, potentially what street you were on, what the weather was like. There's a real clarity. Do you have that with your images?
Yeah, I can. A picture, it'll evoke a smell. Just what was being played, what was being said. Yeah, it is a clue, isn't it? It's to what you went through, and especially if it's a half decent picture. Yeah, I can remember what I was wearing as well, but then I was just probably wearing feeler as usual. But I concur with that, and maybe that's why we keep hunting pictures. I mean, it's a ridiculous way to live photography, I think, trying to make sense of the world, through a rectangle or a square for a moment, but when that moment happens, it is locked for life, and it's worth pursuing. Back to swinging your legs out of bed. That's the drive to capture that image is still there.
I think that is the most wonderful way to conclude our conversation, and I feel, we've spoken for, goodness me, nearly an hour and a half, and I feel like we haven't even touched the surface of some of the things we could have explored. In particular, you mentioned the Trans-Siberian World Cup. I had 1,000,001 questions on that, but maybe we can reconvene at another time.
Yeah, it's like much of my work, it's something I should have done as a younger man, not as a man in his 40s. So yeah, if I can leave you with one bit of advice, it's shoot what you're into now. Don't try and revisit it, as I did with the British abroad, 20 years after you kind of lived through that experience. So whatever you're into, keep documenting it, because one day it'll have some relevance.
That was my conversation with the wonderful Peter Dench. A huge, huge thank you to Peter for taking the time to come on the show and speak with me. I hope you enjoyed listening to him as much as I enjoyed speaking with him. And I don't feel we even scratched the surface with the wonderful work that Peter has done. So fingers crossed, maybe, who knows, we might be able to persuade him to come back for a part 2. If you enjoyed my conversation with Peter, please support the show with your words, not your wallets. It takes less than 30 seconds to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, but it does make a huge, huge difference. Many of you have done this already. If you are one of them, thank you. It means the world to read your reviews. It really does. So if you have left a review, thank you. If you haven't and you can find the time, it would be much appreciated. As well, as I mentioned at the beginning, if there is a photographer you would like to hear in conversation on the Standout Photography Show, let me know on Twitter or Instagram at Matthew D. A. Walker. For now, thank you as always for tuning in. Look after yourselves, and I will see you back here next week. I've been Matthew Walker. He has been Peter Dench, and you have been sensational. Until next time, take care.